My name is Vladanka Andreeva. I'm the United Nations Resident Coordinator, and I lead the UN country team in Azerbaijan, which is 18 United Nations agencies strong. This very first session of the very first Baku Climate Week is going to be dedicated to a larger umbrella discussion titled The Climate Imperative, From Local to Global Action. Just earlier this morning in the opening remarks, you have heard from Professor C, who is the chair of the International Panel on Climate Change, or IPCC for short, and that's the UN body task to assess all science related to climate change. And what he really said, and allow me to paraphrase him, and it's part of the annual reports that this body produces, is we have a rapidly closing window of opportunity to secure a livable and sustainable future. Ladies and gentlemen, I don't think that any person present in this room has any doubt that the time for action is now. And here in Azerbaijan, and this is my 4th year serving as UN Resident Coordinator, what my colleagues and I have witnessed since December last year, when Azerbaijan was announced as the host of COP29, was really a mobilization of each and everyone throughout different sectors for climate action. And as UN Azerbaijan, we have been partnering with many stakeholders, with the COP29 presidency team, with the government, with civil society, with development partners, the academia, young people, on this road to COP29. And we have had a number of initiatives, and the one that I'm very proud of is our flagship initiatives of 29 climate conversation series with key climate interlocutors. This first Baku Climate Action Week is a key milestone on the road to COP29, and we have less than 50 days before the world descends in Baku in November. And today, we are going to hear from a number of experts what needs to be done really to start walking the talk. And I have a pleasure to share the stage this very morning with a number of esteemed panelists that I will invite to join me on the stage now. The very first one is Mr. Stuart Brocklehurst, who is the Deputy Vice Chancellor for Business Engagement and Innovation. He is also the Director of Green Future Solutions at the University of Exeter. So Stuart, please come on the stage. We have the pleasure this morning to be with us in this panel, Ms. Umayra Tagieva, the Deputy Minister of Ecology and Natural Resources. Umayra Hanum. Also, as part of this panel, we will have Mr. Yalchin Rafiev, who is the Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs, but becoming very famous worldwide as the COP29 Chief Negotiator. And we need someone to talk about what runs the world around, money. So we'll have the pleasure of having Mr. Elnur Aliyev, the first Deputy Minister of Economy, as part of this panel too. And the last member of this panel that I will invite now to join the stage is Mikhail Melin, who is the head of the People-Centered Program at Sea for All. Fantastic. I think now everyone have their seats. And let us begin with the opening presentation that will be delivered by Stuart, who I believe will join me here at the lectern. Stuart, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, and thank you also to Nigar and to Malini for arranging this most auspicious occasion today. It's a great honor to be with you, and thank you to everyone for your time this morning. If you're wondering why you have this random British person on the stage in front of you, I should explain that the University of Exeter is one of the major global centres of research into climate science, with over 1,500 academics working on climate and the environment, the largest in one place anywhere in the world, and including more of the world's top 100 ranked climate scientists than any other institution. What I'd like to do today is to talk a little about what the science is telling us about climate change. And secondly, because this is Baku Climate Action Week, to talk about what we can do about it all. I suspect that all of you are familiar with a version of this graph here. Sadly, whilst there has always been variation in the climate, over recent decades, we've seen an unprecedented increase in average global temperatures. And the cause of this is no mystery. Not just the correlation shown so clearly on this graph, but scientific evidence demonstrates the causality that human activity, creating more CO2 and other greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, is directly what drives this increase in temperature. There is a natural carbon cycle on Earth which for millions of years has sat in balance. Activities cause CO2 to be emitted, and natural carbon sinks. The oceans, the forests absorb that CO2. Unfortunately, in recent years, we have thrown this system out of balance through our burning of fossil fuels and changing of land use, primarily through deforestation. And more concerningly, we are now seeing evidence that the natural carbon sinks, in many cases, have reached saturation, meaning that they will stop absorbing CO2. So even at a constant level of emission, the concentration of these gases in the atmosphere is going to accelerate. The consequences of this are considerable. We already have the highest CO2 concentration for at least 2 million years. Sea levels are rising at the fastest rate for at least 3,000 years. And whilst the evidence we have over the history of Arctic and Antarctic ice runs for a much shorter period, we know it's at its lowest level for at least a millennium. Just last year, the Antarctic permanently lost sea ice equivalent to 6 times the size of the United Kingdom. And this has practical direct effects through flooding and wildfires that we're seeing already, with considerable economic cost, but more importantly, human cost, in lives lost, businesses disappearing, homes forgone. Now, back in the early days of the pandemic, most of us found we were spending exponentially more time staring at exponential graphs. There's something about us as humans that we tend to think of change in linear levels. We think that the change we will see ahead will be at the same rate that we've seen it in the past. But unfortunately, when it comes to climate change, tipping points in natural systems drive us across to exponential change. So, as we release more greenhouse gases, temperatures rise. Temperatures rise and they trigger more wildfires. Those wildfires release greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, which accelerates the warming, which accelerates the fires, which accelerates the release of emissions, which accelerates again the warming. Similarly, the tundra, as Jim was mentioning in his video message, over 7 times the total amount of carbon that's present in the atmosphere is held underneath the permafrost. And as temperatures rise, that starts to defrost. It releases those gases, which accelerates warming, which accelerates the defrosting, which accelerates the temperature rise. So we run the risk that the natural system runs out of our control. Last year, in both Canada and in France, emissions from wildfires exceeded the total emissions in those countries from all human activities. So we must act speedily to avoid passing the tipping points, at which point this goes beyond our control. The human effects of this ahead are deeply concerning. Extremes of heat, combined with lethal humidity in areas of large populations such as West Africa and Bangladesh, run the risk of seeing hundreds of millions of people needing to migrate and find new homes, an unprecedented occurrence in human history. Shortage of water, combined with the changing climate, means that places which currently produce much of the world's food will see that production shrink, risking significant levels of hunger and starvation. And as the UN Secretary General said during UNGA last week, over 1 billion people currently live in places which are at risk of flooding from both riverine changes and rising sea levels. We know that we have to get to net zero if we are to stop this from happening. But equally concerning, if we are to stay under 1.5, as is agreed, we have to follow the green line here, an incredibly rapid level of decarbonisation, which at the moment we're nowhere near meeting. So it's a pretty grim picture. However, I do believe we have grounds for optimism and for hope. This graph is normally shown as a negative because the red line of the policies we've implemented to date comes nowhere near the blue line that we need to fulfill if we're to limit warming to 1.5°C. But I see a positive here. For decades, emissions have been going almost vertically up. We have already managed to get them to stabilize. Now that is nowhere near enough. We need to go from stable to a sharp decline. But if we can go from this to this, then we should have some confidence that we will have it within us to get from this to this. And I may have invented a new dance move there. Beyond that, we can have hope in the fact that we already know what we have to do to get to halving of emissions by 2030, and we have a pretty clear sense what we need to do to get to zero by 2050. Back to the pandemic, we were locked away in our houses waiting for scientists to discover the vaccine. Here, that isn't necessary. Science has already told us what the vaccine is. We simply need to take it. And also we have optimism in the fact that tipping points can help us with the solution. Because exponential growth is all around us when it comes to the transitional industries which will provide our solution to climate change. Whether it's in electric vehicles, in storage, in renewables, we're seeing this rapid growth. As they scale up, the production gets cheaper, and there is greater investment in R&D, which makes them more effective and efficient. In 1979, Jimmy Carter put solar panels on the roof of the White House. Since then, the cost of a solar panel to generate a kilowatt of electricity has reduced in real terms by 99.9%. And the good news keeps coming, because we are also finding that we can cascade these positive tipping points. As we get more electric vehicles, the price of making a battery is reduced. If we're to move fully to renewables, we need storage for the times when the sun doesn't shine and the wind doesn't blow. So the uptake in EVs has made the move to renewable energy easier by making it cheaper to buy the storage you require. And that's just one of a whole load of positive reinforcing loops that we're seeing. We've also seen now that we don't have to choose between decarbonisation and economic growth, as both on the grounds of consumption emissions and on territorial emissions, we're seeing many countries around the world, of which these are just a few, growing their economies strongly whilst they decarbonise. If in this short summary, I haven't left you terrified at what we are facing, I have failed in my task. But equally, if I haven't left you with faith and belief that we have it within us to address it, I have failed as well. Climate change is the greatest challenge facing humanity, probably the greatest challenge that humanity has ever faced. And it is our generation which has the responsibility and the opportunity to address this. History will judge us on how we respond. Thank you.
Thank you, Stuart. Climate change is not a futuristic tale. It's here, and people and communities around the globe are feeling its impact. And Stuart has really just presented that. But what is important is that there are some tools at our disposal that we can apply to adapt to the climate change. And in Azerbaijan, the Ministry of Environment has been leading on the development of the National Action Adaptation Plan. And through stakeholders' consultations, they have come up with 3 priority areas that they believe in Azerbaijan are most suspect to or vulnerable to the climate change. And we are talking about water, agriculture, and coastal areas. So I would like to ask Ms. Umayra Tegeva, the Deputy Minister of Ecology and Natural Resources, to share with us what are some of the actions that Azerbaijan do plan to undertake in terms of their adaptation strategy, but also what are some of the challenges that you think Azerbaijan might face in the implementation of these measures. The floor is yours.
Dear colleagues, friends, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Thank you very much for a valuable question, because adaptation is standing in the center of climate agenda of the world. The world is already experiencing changes in average temperature, shifts in the seasons, an increased frequency of extreme weather events and slow onset events. Countries and communities need to adapt to the climate consequences and respond to current and future climate change impact. As you know, NAP process was established under the Cancun Adaptation Framework in 2010 at COP16 and enabled parties to formulate and implement national adaptation plan to reduce vulnerability to the impact of climate change by building adaptive capacity and resilience, and to facilitate the integration of climate change adaptation into relevant new and existing policies, programs, and activities. Adaptation action can take many forms, and depending on the unique context of a country or region. And here there is no one-size-fits-all solution. Adaptation can range from building flood defenses, setting up early warning systems, switching to drought-resilient crops, to updating communication system, business operations, and government policies. And successful adaptation not only depends on governments, but also to active engagement of stakeholders, including local communities, national, regional, and international organizations, public and private sector, civil societies, and other relevant actors, as well as an effective management of knowledge. Adaptation should be based on and guided by the best available science. Under the Paris Agreement, the global goal adaptation was established following the conclusion of two-year work program. At COP28, parties adopted a UIA framework for global climate resilience as part of UIA consensus. According to the World Meteorological Organization, last 10-year average temperature was on 1.2 degrees higher compared to pre-industrial level. A rise of temperature above 1.5 will be increased risk to health, livelihood, food security, water supply, human security, and economic growth. The World Meteorological Organization report confirmed that 2023 was warmest year on record, with the global average near surface temperature at 0.45 degrees Celsius higher compared to pre-industrial level. In Azerbaijan, the temperature was higher; it was about 1.9 degrees. Climate change is not just about temperatures. The world moving in the dangerous direction. Although they have not yet exceeded the target 1.5 temperature level, but are moving toward it. As opportunity to take action to keep temperature below 1.5 are shrinking fast. They must cut emissions quickly and sustainably. Our country is truly unique. The geographical location and diverse relief allow us to consider a relatively small territory as a model for 8 climate types. Environmental problems that comes by climate change, characteristic to steppe and semi-desert, coastal and mountainous countries, are also observed in Azerbaijan. Here, just some of them: land erosion, melting glaciers, degradation of wetland area, changes in sea level, forest fires, and decrease in water resources. Melting of glacier and decreasing in the area of snow in winter time lead to decreasing water level in rivers. The duration of droughts has increased by 19%. Over the past 10 years, the decrease in the total amount of precipitation by 10 degrees had a significant impact to agriculture. And in fact, that agriculture production is directly dependent on climate condition has made it the most vulnerable sector to climate change. Another example of how contrasting the manifestation of climate change in our country, you can see from that slide. In the previous slide, you saw a fact that which confirmed the water shortage. At the same time, over the same time period, they are faced with unprecedented number of floods. Last year, they had 147 cases. This year, despite in fact that the autumn period is ahead, the number is already 102. Those processes affected ecosystem and lead to risk for biodiversity. The IPCC 6th assessment report talks about risk of species. And the third red book volume has become because of number of flora and fauna species in country at risk has increased. Observe, research, and act. Guided by this principle, they can mitigate possible consequences. Adaptation is not abstract thinking about what can be done. Adaptation requires specific action. They increased our protected areas up to 10.3% of country territories and planning further extend them. At the same time, in the recent year, species introduction projects have helped restore population not only in the country, but also in South Caucasus. The Caspian Sea level is continuously decreasing. From 1995 up to now, the difference has more than 2 meters. The decrease in level has seriously affected the ecosystem of the sea and coastal area, including biological diversity and coastal infrastructure, including cultural and tourism recreation facilities. In line with rising air temperature, the reduction of level contribute to faster warming of sea water, which is risk for biodiversity. Following the principle of observe, research, and act, the monitoring in Caspian Sea is conducted on the research ship Aliyev 4 times a year, but we do not limit ourselves to this. Every year, millions of grove fishers are released into the country water bodies. An increase in the frequency and duration of heat waves is noted in the latest IPCC reports. Heat waves also become more frequent in Azerbaijan. And now I want to share with you an example of how they can mitigate possible consequences by acting. Adaptation is specific action which must be taken before, during, and after. Heat waves, especially for the population, for the capital population, the real risk. Joint research, development of methodology, and coordinated work of the Institute of Geography, the Ministry of Health, and the Ministry of Ecology served as the basis for the release of new type of product, namely medico-meteorological forecasts and warnings. Those warnings were prepared for both the sensitive people suffering from cardiovascular diseases and the population as a whole. During the hot period, early warnings of the onset of the heat waves made it possible to significantly reduce the number of ambulance calls with diagnosis of heat stroke or sunstroke. In the graph, you can clearly see the difference. Despite the fact that number of abnormally hot days growing, the number of ambulance calls has significantly decreased compared to the period before informing the population. All over the world, forest fires resulted by the huge damage. But in this case, a coordinated response allows us to prevent disaster here too. In 2022, a peak of forest fires was noted. Nesterov methodology was used, and based on which the fire hazard index was calculated by meteorological data. The National Hydromet Service provides warnings to both the relevant authorities, such as Ministry of Emergency Situation and the population. As a result of the coordinated work of the relevant authorities, the situation improved in subsequent years. Climate change is an irreversible process. Therefore, it is important to develop adaptation measure in all sectors. And if we will take into account that future climate scenarios is not optimistic, the adaptation is crucially important. Early warning system aims to enable early action to save and protect lives, livelihood, and asset of people at risk. According to the World Meteorological Organization, damage from disasters can be reduced by 30% if early warning is issued within 24 hours. Our target is to create early warning system up to 2027 as effective adaptation measure. Significant action are taken by government to invest into modernization of monitoring system and the support of UNEP and Green Climate Fund, the planning to strengthen climate information and multi-hazard early warning system for increased resilience in Azerbaijan. And another significant steps is increasing the public awareness on climate change issue and the tree planting and other activities with participation of wide range stakeholders become traditional in Azerbaijan and allow to draw attention of population and raise their awareness on climate issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayra Hanum. Now let me turn to the person on my left side, COP29 chief negotiator who arrived from New York last night. The COP29 team was in New York during the high-level week where you had a number of events. You have presented the progress done so far in preparations for the COP29, but you have also presented the action agenda and presidency initiatives, 14 of them, and I'm very proud to say that through the UN Global Task Force on COP29 that I co-chair with my colleagues from New York, the UN Development System has supported and closely partnered with COP29 presidency team on 12 of these initiatives. Yalcin, what can you tell us more about the initiatives?
Thank you, Vladanka. Good morning, dear friends, colleagues. I would like also to thank the organizers for this very significant event, I would say, in also showcasing Azerbaijan's determination to address the adverse impacts of climate change and to contribute to the global efforts. I think the previous speakers were quite successful in describing the level of drama when it comes to the climate change, but apologies in advance that I will further dramatize it from the perspectives that I'm responsible for, and also to try, in response to your question, to describe how Azerbaijan is going to contribute to the process. But the good news is that solutions are still possible. As Stuart mentioned, I think we are really going through a very challenging period for the humanity, but at the same time, it is still possible that we keep ourselves within 1.5 limit of the global warming. Today in the morning, Minister Babayev outlined the vision of COP29 presidency of Azerbaijan, which is consisted of two major pillars: enhancing ambition and enabling action. And I will try to explain, and based on your question, to try to give a clear understanding on where we are at the global level and how Azerbaijan is going to bridge the gaps. On enhancing ambition pillar of our vision, Azerbaijan aims to encourage the world community, international climate community, and the parties to the Convention of the Climate Change and Paris Agreement to come up with their ambitious national determined contributions, which are set to be submitted by February 2025. But are we there in terms of being ready to submit the NDCs? According to reliable sources of information, only around 30 countries are preparing to submit their NDCs by the deadline. This is, in comparison, what we are desiring for a very low number. And what is lacking, why the countries are reluctant in submitting, is very obvious: the lack of means of implementation or the finance. Many countries, especially the developing countries, and most importantly, the countries in special circumstances like small island developing states, the least developed countries, are specifically vulnerable because of the shortage of their financial resources to fund their mitigation efforts, at the same time to build resilience adequately. So therefore, Baku COP is very important for the international community to come up with a fair and ambitious new collective quantified goal. What does fair and ambitious mean? Is for the moment subject to considerations and negotiations among the parties, But what is clear that it should be adequate to the urgency and scale of the problem, and it should take into account the needs and priorities of the developing country parties. The second important element under the enhancing ambition pillar is biannual transparency reports, or operationalization of the enhanced transparency framework of the Paris Agreement. Azerbaijan, in this regard, has prioritized at the beginning of the year that the countries should submit their biannual transparency reports, first time in the history of the COP this year, the deadline of which is by the end of this year. So we have organized several global workshops, regional workshops for the countries to build their capacity to prepare these reports, since they are very technically challenging documents to make it ready. A lot of data needs to be collected, analysis should be made, and many developing countries are in desperate need of capacity to deal with this. So Azerbaijan in May organized a global workshop in this very building, and then we have also organized several regional workshops in Togo, Kenya, in Kazakhstan, and we are preparing to have 2 more in Latin America and Asia Pacific. So we try to build globally the capacity and technical base for developing countries to come up with their biannual transparency report. And of course, NAPs, as Madam Taghi also mentioned, adaptation is a very important pillar of the global climate action. And each party should build climate resilience by coming up with their own NAPs by 2025. Enhancing ambition, of course, are good for us to be within the 1.5 aligned targets and objectives. But for that, as I mentioned, we need means of implementation, and NCKG is only one part of it, new collective quantified goal. But we need also additional source of funding, like multilateral development banks should be also in the scene. They need to increase their portfolio of helping, both from the ODA perspective of the development assistance, but also from the investment perspectives to support the developing countries to be ready for their effective mitigation efforts, but at the same time to build climate resilience. And technology. Technology is very important, since each passing day we are experiencing the several manifestations of the climate change, and each of them need to be addressed in a tailor-made manner. Technology in this regard is very important means of implementation. But at the same time, technology is very important tool for adaptation. Like Caspian Sea level, as Caspian Sea level is declining, we need to have a scenario-based planning for that. And artificial intelligence in this regard could be an important tool for us to make an assessment on how we can deal with this important issue, which is affecting both biodiversity in our region, but also the connectivity and transportation issues in the longer perspective. And the second biggest negotiated deliverable from Baku COP is Article 6 operationalization, which is a carbon market that Minister Babayev also touched upon this morning. There we have a much positive picture in terms of the negotiation process, because all countries are now understanding how important it is to have this long-standing unresolved issue to be settled in order to create additional source of funding. As you mentioned, we have recently announced 14 initiatives, Presidency, and this is exactly when we tailored these initiatives, they were designed for the purpose of complementing the negotiation process. But at the same time, we tried to strike a fair and careful balance across the pillars of the Paris Agreement in terms of, or namely mitigation, adaptation, and finance. But at the same time, we tried to have such initiatives that could contribute to SDG implementation globally. Some of those initiatives are extremely welcomed by international community, including the Climate Finance Action Fund that Minister Japarov today in the morning referred to, or the COP Truce initiative, which is the initiative that Azerbaijan has put forward to serve for the global peace, but at the same time global mitigation efforts. There are some more initiatives like green energy storage and grids initiative that Minister Shahbazov mentioned. This is very important also in terms of implementation of the COP28 outcomes. In the global stocktake, one of the major outcomes was the parties committed themselves to triple renewable energy and double energy efficiency. But for this purpose to be operationalized and implemented, we need an infrastructure to be in place. Like the grids and the storage capacity need to be increased. And we are expecting with this initiative to increase the green energy storage capacity at sixfold, and also the millions of kilometers of the grids need to be established. Another initiative on the energy dimension is hydrogen, clean hydrogen initiative. This is also important, again, in terms of implementation of the previous COP commitments, but at the same time in ensuring our energy transition and green energy targets to be met. And on the adaptation front, agricultural initiative of Harmonia that we have developed together with Food and Agriculture Organization has been welcomed by the farmer communities, the rural communities, that also demonstrated that Azerbaijan is not only paying attention to energy transition and adaptation effort at the sea or urban level, but also we are paying significant attention to the rural communities to build their capacities. And finally, on human development is an important initiative that we have developed together, again, with United Nations institutions, since the job skills, education, awareness raising are important tools that we need to put in place as addressing the climate change and adverse impacts of the climate change start from the local level, from the grassroots level that everybody should understand first its role, responsibility, then to design the policies and strategies to deal with climate. And finally, I would like to thank personally to Vladanka and the wider UN system for supporting Azerbaijan in developing these 14 initiatives, which I think will be additional asset to the success of the COP29 and in a wider context, the global climate action. Thank you.
Thank you, Yalcin Melim. There are two important national documents that Azerbaijan has adopted. There is a vision, Azerbaijan 2030, the national priorities for socioeconomic development, and then the strategy for the socioeconomic development, the action plan, if you will, for 2022-2026. And both of these key documents have identified the clean environment and country of green growth as one of the 5 priority directions for the country's development of 2030, but also for the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. And today, with us, we are having the first Deputy Minister for Economy, Mr. Aliyev. And I would like to ask you, Elmer, could you please share with us how does climate change impact Azerbaijan's economy? And what are the key targets for green growth in Azerbaijan? Over to you.
Thank you, Vladanka. Good morning, dear friends, colleagues. Maybe I will start my speech. When you introduced me, you highlighted the world money. And I would like to say a phrase from the Nobel Prize winning economist Joseph Stiglitz, when he says that we will pay for the climate change in one or another way, but let's spend the money now to reduce emissions rather than in the future to pay a lot for the consequences. It's a cliche, but it's true. And also prevention is better than the pound of cure. So today during the opening ceremony, actually our esteemed ministers, Shahbaz Babayev and Minister Jabbarov gave the snapshot of the Azerbaijan's role, Azerbaijan's attitude, our expectations as a part of the global world, global economy, and then Azerbaijan as itself, what we are doing here. and our expectations. What can be done more? Going directly to your question, the impact of the climate change in Azerbaijan, of course, as a part of the global economy, it has direct impact on different areas of our economy as itself. So, of course, the first and the foremost part of the economy is agriculture. The non-oil sector of Azerbaijan's economy, our agriculture sector plays a pivotal role in that sector, in that area, and many people are working in that sphere. Thus, last years we have seen the droughts here, and something new for our maybe the landscape sandstorms as well. And that recently happens in Baku as well. It creates obstacles for the improvement of agriculture. Now what we have done so far, we are trying to cultivate here the crops which can be cultivated in arid and semi-arid areas. It means that we have to change the structure of our food consumption as well. Scarcity of the water resources creates, and taking into account that up to 70% of the runoffs are coming from the neighborhood countries, starting from the biggest rivers like Kur and Aras. And due to the climate change in the region, droughts in the region as well, the neighborhood countries are starting to create water resources. Therefore, right now we have seen the scarcity of these resources. It means that we have to upskill the people in that sector as well. Another sector where we are facing the changes is tourism. Azerbaijan boasts with its ski resorts here in the region. We have the millions of tourists for the northern part of Azerbaijan, for the ski resources as well as to Nakhchivan. But right now, for the last years, there is due to the lack of the snow, we are seeing the less number of the tourists as well. Of course, another area that suffers from the climate change here is about this infrastructure. Infrastructure not only about something as a country within the borders of the country, but infrastructure in the big sense. Example, Caspian Sea. When we are talking about the route from east to west, for now we are boasting that we are playing the main role on this route. But what we have seen for the last years, due to the decrease of the sea level, it becomes more uncomfortable for our ships to have cargoes from east to west side of the sea. So it means that the governments, not only here in Azerbaijan, but around the Caspian Sea on this route, huge route, historical route, have to pay, have to spend more money on this kind of infrastructure. This is another kind of impact. Together with droughts, of course, we suffer from the floods as well here. It means that the government has to heavily invest on the infrastructure around the country. If we take into account also the infrastructure works that are being done on highland regions of the newly liberated territories, it means that it makes a big pressure on the public funds as well, on government expenditure as well. You mentioned our socio-economic development program for the next year's Azerbaijan Vision 2030. Yes, we have there the clean environment, we have there as well as the innovative economy, but we also have there the people who will play out of 5 priorities, one is about the competitive human resources. In other words, we have to upskill all these people that will face with the change in this region. Maybe last but not the least area where we face impact of the climate change, as my esteemed colleague Umayra Khanım mentioned, it's about the human capital. For the last years, we have seen the increase of the government expenditure on health issues as well. Different diseases, not only directly linked to the heat, like the heart problems, heart disease problems, but other kind of disease has been widespread in the region as well. So it means that it creates, climate change creates either direct or indirect effect in all areas of the economy with which we have to live. We have to change our patterns, change the patterns as well as not the people but also the government as well. Maybe briefly, I just stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Elnur, and thank you for reminding us that money spent on climate action are not expenditure, are investment, which I think is very important take-home message for all the governments, but each and every individual when planning on how to address the climate change. What is also very important is that we ensure, as we undertake climate action, to really have just and equitable transition. And these are not empty words. This means that we have to ensure, and this is where our shared responsibility and global solidarity comes in play, that everyone on this planet do have access to the finance, to the technology, and to the science to really make sure that as humanity, we survive this climate change. Our very last speaker for this session is Michael Mellin, who is the head of People-Centered Program at Sea for All. And Michael, I would like to ask you to please say a few words about the mandate of Sea for All, but also if you could give us a few examples of people-centered and grassroots-based solution projects that have helped improve people's lives, but also communities at large.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Vladanka. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, good morning to you all, and a big thank you to the hosts for this week. I'm sure it's been a hectic few days leading up to this big, beautiful event here in Baku. Now, there obviously is no just or equitable energy transition, if you think about it, without sustainable energy for all as part of that equation. Now, Sustainable Energy for All, the organization that I work for, Vladanka, was established some 10 years ago by the then former UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon. And it was really established with the mission in mind to put sustainable energy at the core of the Sustainable Development Goal, hence SDG 7, but also then to oversee and help implement that. And so obviously the main objectives is obviously to ensure that access, as you spoke, to affordable, reliable and sustainable energy and modern energy is available to all the people. So this SDG 7, as we know it, revolves around 3 pillars. It's about renewable energy, it's about energy efficiency, but it's also about energy access, which is access to electricity, but also clean cooking. Now, this has become also increasingly important when it comes to the climate actions that we need to take, to the broader development agendas. So therefore, we at SC4All, we work very closely with governments, private sector, civil society, at global, regional, and at the country level to implement and unlock actions to meet these targets across those pillars of energy, climate, and development. Now, my Chief Executive Officer, Damilola Ogumbi, is also the UN Secretary General's Special Representative for Sustainable Energy and co-chair of UN Energy. So we work very closely with the UN family, but also many other partners in this space. So why is that important, you might ask yourself? And so there's a few numbers I would really like to highlight and as a key takeaways perhaps from this session. And it's clear that while we're making some progress in ramping up renewables and, considering energy efficiency across the various actions we take, the human angle or the access agenda is still a big problem for this world. I mean, we have, according to the latest data which was released in New York last week, we have 685 million people without access to electricity. That's nearly 1 in 10 that don't have access to that basic support to run the daily life. What's even perhaps more striking is that we still have more than 2 billion people, well, nearly 1 in 3, that don't have access to clean cooking. And that's really access to solutions and fuels to prepare meals, the many meals that we all have every day. So you can imagine that's 1 in 3 that don't have access to those fuels, and that comes obviously with the great dire consequences. And I'll come to that shortly. So when you think about it, it's really about, yes, it's about people, it's about the planet, but it's also about development. And we all can imagine what it means, coming back to that access to electricity. Imagine if we didn't have it. I mean, it really is a basic, fundamental element in our daily life, electricity these days. I mean, without electricity, there's hardly any education or opportunities for good education at least. The connectivity, the business opportunities, the digital agendas. I mean, these things that we all take for granted, many don't have it, and that then obviously becomes quickly a vicious circle. Clean cooking, as mentioned, the orphan agenda often, for too long, that affects more than 2 billion people, comes at great cost for health. Mainly women, children, die in the millions every year because having to inhale smoke from traditional or dirty ways of cooking, basically burning biomass, charcoal, or other fuels to make those meals. And it's the sisters, the wives, the daughters, and it's the kids on their back that suffer most. Now, it's about health, but it's also a leading cause for deforestation. So obviously, when you burn a lot of wood or produce charcoal for urban areas, there's a lot of forests being wiped out permanently. And there's also a lost economic opportunity. Many people spend countless hours every week collecting that wood fuel, and often it's a grey economy altogether without any formal tax base that would generate jobs, revenue for the government. And talking about that opportunity to invest in it, the cost of inaction, of not tackling clean cooking, was estimated by the World Bank some years back to be 2.4 trillion. And so it really makes a lot of sense to tackle it. But the good news, as the lead negotiator, chief negotiator said, is that, of course, there's a lot of solutions that are readily available on the shelf. I mean, electricity is not an innovation from yesterday, neither is clean cooking. So you have, when it comes to now looking at clean cooking in particular, you have electricity, you have ethanol, biogas, pellets, LPG, all those solutions readily on the shelf. And in fact, it's not even that costly to deploy them. We're still speaking about investments in the single digit of billions. And with that low-hanging fruit, we can wipe out or tackle roughly 2 to 3% of global CO2 emissions, which is at par with the aviation industry. So that's one thing. Also, cooking or not having access to clean cooking is the one major cause for black carbon. I think it's estimated to be 56%. So on many fronts, it makes a lot of sense. So let's remember those, that access agenda in these discussions, and obviously hoping that like the COP29 presidency also spotlights it as a main agenda point in a few weeks from now. Now finally, I wanted to respond to your last question, and that's to give you an example of what can be done. And I wanted to give an example around a impactful partnership that Sustainable Energy for All formed earlier this year together with the World Food Programme. And that's something that we came together to really take this opportunity to see how can we transition schools to clean cooking. And as a concrete project activity, we kickstarted this project in Tanzania a few months ago. And in a country like Tanzania, you have roughly 18,000 government primary schools. And out of those 18,000 schools, you have 9,000 or so that provide some school feeding, so providing meals to the children coming to the school. And 5,000 or so of those schools are already connected to the grid, but 99% of them cook with biomass. So, as you can imagine, schools often after the households are really, cooking at scale if you want, and we're talking about big buckets of wood going into that. So the beautiful opportunity here is, together with the World Food Programme, is to see how you merge agendas, have electrification and clean cooking go hand in hand. And so what we're doing concretely is to provide electric cooking to these grid-connected schools. We're kickstarting it with 50 schools with the ambition to scale it up eventually to all schools in Tanzania and beyond. And it is also a good opportunity to explore what would a successful carbon finance model look like, to be able to sustain, in other words, pay for the electricity, but also to scale up. And finally, two other elements that are often overlooked, and I still want to emphasize it, is women and the youth as part of these discussions. There's way too few women still today in this sector, and the youth hasn't necessarily seen the opportunities that exist in energy. Because energy often, when it's mentioned, it's often like, okay, that's a job for the engineers, but it really isn't. It's a job for everyone because it comes from all the angles. So as part of this joint initiative, we're really mainstreaming gender and youth considerations across those activities. We're also making sure that we use those schools as platforms to showcase what's possible, because only by seeing is believing, of course, and then the kids, this is the final word, I promise, is that those kids, when they see what can be done in the schools, would then become the champions of change at the household level. So thank you, Radhanka, for that.
Thank you, Mikhail. I think it's very important to have these concrete examples, and thank you for emphasizing the role of young people, something that we take very close to our heart. I think we don't have Leila Hassanova in the room with us anymore, but we have definitely partnered and tried to mobilize young people of Azerbaijan to not only be part of the solutions, but have the skills and knowledge to really be part of the discussion and then part of the implementations of the actions agreed. Dear friends, we have had 5 excellent speakers for this first panel, and I hope we are going to leave you with a sense of urgency, but sense of hope and optimism that we do have the science telling us we have to act now. We have some of the tools, and what we need now is really mobilization and solidarity to really implement urgent actions. Let me thank my panelists once again and thank the audience.